Sarah Brooks, a dedicated flight attendant and single mother, is thrown into a world of disbelief and heartbreak when she glimpses a man on her flight who looks exactly like her late husband, Luke. 5 years ago, Sarah mourned Luke's tragic death, pouring her heart into raising their son, Noah, while trying to move forward. But now, the impossible has happened. The man she lost, the man she loved, is seemingly alive, with a mysterious past he's desperate to hide. As Sarah wrestles with anger, confusion, and the pull of old memories, she's faced with impossible choices. Can she risk letting Luke back into her life? Or is he still hiding dangerous secrets? And as a new friendship offers her hope, will Sarah find the strength to protect her family and finally let go of the past? Join us as we unravel this story of love, betrayal, and redemption. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories and leave a comment below. What would you do if someone you loved, thought gone forever, suddenly came back into your life? Now let's dive in. The cabin lights glowed a soft, ambient blue as Sarah Brooks made her way down the aisle, greeting passengers with a warm smile that had long become second nature. Her navy blue flight attendant uniform, freshly pressed, held the familiarity of routine and professionalism. But something about today felt off. There was a prickling tension at the back of her mind that even her best smile couldn't shake. It had been a week since she last saw her son, Noah, and she missed him terribly. Noah was only 3 when his father, Luke, passed in a car accident, and she often wondered how much of his father he'd remember as he grew up. For a moment, as she finished arranging her card in the first-class cabin, Sarah allowed herself to daydream about being home again. She imagined Noah's laughter, his little arms thrown around her neck as he shared stories about school and proudly recounted his newest dinosaur facts. A burst of laughter interrupted her reverie, and Sarah's attention snapped back to the present. The laugh was rich, hearty, a laugh she knew far too well. Her breath hitched, and she turned instinctively toward the sound. There, sitting in the plush first-class seat nearest the window, was a man who looked like him. Luke, her husband. She blinked, her vision swimming as she tried to reconcile the impossible. Her mind immediately rejected the idea, and she wondered if she had worked one too many double shifts. Her gaze moved to his jawline, his familiar eyes, the tilt of his mouth as he spoke to the woman next to him. Every feature was as unmistakable as it was impossible. It was Luke, laughing as if he hadn't a care in the world. The tray in her hands wobbled, and she steadied it, praying she wasn't dreaming. She stared, hoping the image would blur, would morph into someone else. But when she looked back, he was still there, smiling, his head tipped back in a way that was so familiar it hurt. Sarah's legs felt leaden, but she forced herself to move forward, her hands gripping the tray as though it could anchor her in reality. "Ma'am!" A passenger in the aisle seat cleared his throat, reminding her of the world outside her shock. "Oh yes, I'm sorry," she murmured, forcing herself to look away, to function, to breathe. She continued serving drinks, her hands moving automatically while her mind spun in tight, dizzying circles. How was it possible? Luke had been dead for 5 years. She'd gone to his funeral, stood in a haze of numb disbelief as people murmured their condolences, watched as the life she'd built shattered in front of her. She had cried herself numb, alone in a house that no longer felt like home. And yet here he was. As she moved to the next aisle, she stole another glance. The man Luke was listening to the woman beside him, his face soft, his smile so familiar that Sarah's heart twisted painfully. She recognized the slope of his shoulders, the way he leaned in when someone was speaking. And yet he looked completely at ease, laughing and carefree, as if the last 5 years had simply been a terrible dream. As the flight progressed, Sarah found herself struggling to focus. The routine, usually comforting, felt like an ill-fitting costume she was forced to wear. Every time she walked past his seat, she fought the urge to stop, to grab his arm and demand answers. She debated whether to speak to him, to demand an explanation for his impossible existence here in this plane. But every time she came close, her courage failed her, and she carried on down the aisle. She forced herself to avoid looking at him, to focus on anything else: the hum of the engines, the chatter of passengers, the laughter of children. Yet, in every quiet moment, her mind drifted back to him. She could hardly believe she was considering it, but she decided she would confront him when the plane landed. She'd wait for the rest of the passengers to disembark, and then she'd approach him. As they began their descent, Sarah's pulse raced. She tried to breathe deeply, to find some measure of calm, but it felt like her nerves were electrified, and every inch of her was drawn to the man who might be her husband. Finally, the plane touched down, and Sarah held her breath as passengers began gathering their bags, slowly filtering toward the exit. She watched him out of the corner of her eye, her heart racing as he stood, stretched, and reached for his carry-on. The woman he'd been sitting with slipped her arm through his, and they walked together down the aisle. Sarah felt a pang of jealousy and emotion she hadn't felt in years. How could he be so at ease? How could he look so happy, so completely unbothered, while she was left drowning in confusion and hurt? As he passed, he glanced at her, his eyes meeting hers for a brief second. Sarah felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the cabin, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. But he looked right through her, his expression one of polite indifference, as though she were just another flight attendant, a stranger. He walked by without a flicker of recognition, and she felt the walls close in around her. The rest of the passengers filed out, oblivious to the tempest raging inside her. Finally, she was alone in the empty cabin, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she tried to comprehend what had just happened. She had seen Luke. She was certain of it. But he'd walked away without a second glance, as though the last 5 years had meant nothing. By the time she arrived at her hotel, the world felt as though it were spinning on a different axis. Sarah lay awake in the stillness of her room, replaying every detail of her encounter. Her emotions were a whirlwind of anger, confusion, and a faint, painful hope that refused to be silenced. Her memories of Luke, which had grown softer and gentler with time, now tore through her heart with renewed sharpness. The next morning, she boarded her flight back to Chicago, her movements stiff and mechanical. By the time she arrived, her exhaustion felt bone deep. She picked up Noah from his after-school program, savoring his warm hug as he ran into her arms. For a few precious moments, she let herself sink into the familiar comfort of her son's love, allowing his laughter and stories to drown out the tumult in her mind. But the respite was fleeting. Late that night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her phone chimed. The screen illuminated her room, and she squinted as she reached for it, her heart stalling as she saw the message. "I saw you on the plane. We need to talk." Sarah felt as though the floor had dropped from beneath her. She read the words over and over, her mind reeling. If this was truly Luke, alive and hiding from her for reasons she couldn't fathom, what could he possibly say to explain the last 5 years? In the days that followed, Sarah confided in Chris, a longtime co-worker and friend. Chris had always been kind, an attentive listener who could turn even the most difficult conversation into a space of comfort. Sarah hesitated at first, feeling almost foolish as she recounted her encounter on the plane. But Chris listened with an open mind, his brow furrowing as he took in every detail. "Look," he said softly, "if you think it's him, you deserve to find out why he's back. This isn't something you can ignore, Sarah. If he's alive, you deserve answers." Chris's quiet encouragement soothed her, and she felt an unexpected wave of gratitude. He offered to be there if she needed anything, insisting he didn't want her facing this alone. Despite her anxiety, Sarah found herself drawing strength from his support. After much deliberation, she replied to Luke's message, choosing a neutral coffee shop as their meeting place. The day of the meeting, Sarah sat at a small corner table in the cafe, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. She glanced at the door every few seconds, her heart jumping each time a new customer walked in. Just as she was about to give up hope, she saw him. Luke walked in, looking tired and worn, a shadow of the vibrant man she'd once known. She took in the subtle differences, the lines around his eyes, the slightly stooped shoulders, the way he glanced over his shoulder, as if someone might be following him. He looked around, spotting her, and their eyes met. Her heart twisted painfully, a mixture of relief and anger crashing over her. He approached slowly, slipping into the seat across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence thick with tension. Finally, he took a deep breath and spoke, his voice rough and hoarse. "Sarah," he said, his eyes clouded with regret, "I'm sorry. I know this is impossible to explain, but I need you to understand why I had to do it." Sarah's fingers tightened around her coffee cup, her emotions a roiling storm. She could feel the anger simmering just beneath the surface, mingling with a longing she hadn't felt in years. "You let me believe you were dead," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You let me grieve for you. You let our son grow up without his father. How could you do that to us?" Luke's face twisted with pain, and he reached out, but she pulled her hands back, a barrier of hurt and betrayal between them. "Sarah, please," he whispered. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I got involved with people I shouldn't have, and when I realized the danger, I thought faking my death was the only way to keep you safe. I thought if I disappeared, they'd leave you and Noah alone." Sarah looked at Luke, searching his eyes for a shred of the man she'd once loved. But there was something guarded, even haunted, about him now, a wariness she'd never seen before. He looked older, the sparkle that had once made him so magnetic dulled under lines of worry and regret. She cleared her throat, swallowing her hurt as she asked, "If you thought you were keeping us safe by leaving, then why are you back now? Why did you come looking for me?" Luke's eyes darted toward the window, his gaze restless. "I'm not safe anymore, Sarah," he admitted, his voice low. "The people I was running from, they've found me. I can't do this alone. I thought," he paused, running a hand over his face. "I thought maybe I could finally explain things to you. Maybe even stay here, just for a little while, until I figure things out." Sarah felt a flicker of anger reignite inside her. She had spent the last 5 years building a life from the ashes of the one he'd left behind, and now he wanted her to risk everything for him? She didn't know if she could trust him, or if he even deserved her help after all he'd put her through. But another part of her, the part that remembered the good times, the love they'd shared, ached to understand, to find a way to help him if she could. "You don't get to just walk back into my life, Luke," she said, her voice sharp but trembling. "You don't get to show up and ask for my help without an explanation." Luke reached out, his voice raw with desperation. "I know, and you don't owe me anything, but I have nowhere else to go. Just a little time, Sarah. That's all I'm asking." Silence hung between them, and Sarah's emotions churned with equal parts anger and pity. She nodded slowly, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. "You can stay for a night. Just one," she whispered, her voice hardening. "But after that, we're done. I've spent too long rebuilding my life to throw it all away now." Later that evening, back at her house, Sarah moved around the kitchen, her hands busy preparing a simple dinner while her mind whirled with unanswered questions. Luke sat across from her at the table, watching her with a cautious look, as though afraid of pushing her too far. Noah had fallen asleep hours ago, blissfully unaware of the reunion that had just turned Sarah's life upside down. As she set a plate down in front of Luke, she struggled to suppress the conflicting emotions bubbling within her. She wanted answers, but she was afraid of what she might hear. Luke cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Sarah, I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you. Leaving was the hardest thing I've ever done." Sarah shook her head, her voice barely controlled. "Then why, Luke? Why did you do it? If you loved us, why did you let us believe you were dead?" Luke looked down, his hands twisting together. "I was involved in some financial work that went wrong. I didn't know how deep I was until it was too late. The people I worked with threatened me when I tried to back out. They said they'd come after you and Noah if I didn't cooperate." He paused, and his eyes were filled with a kind of fear she hadn't seen before. "I thought disappearing was the only way to protect you. And by the time I realized how wrong I was, it was too late." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "And what about now?" she demanded. "Are they still looking for you? Are Noah and I in danger again because of you?" Luke's silence was answer enough. Sarah's chest tightened with frustration and dread. All this time, she'd assumed she'd been protecting Noah by keeping him out of danger, when in reality, Luke's secrets had only brought new risks into their lives. Just then, The doorbell rang, startling both of them. Sarah frowned, glancing toward the door. She hadn't been expecting anyone. As she walked over and opened it, she found Chris standing there, a concerned look on his face. "I wanted to check on you," he said softly, his gaze flicking past her to land on Luke. A shadow crossed his expression as he stepped inside. Luke stiffened, his gaze narrowing. "Who's this?" he asked, his tone wary. Chris met his eyes evenly. "I'm a friend of Sarah's." He glanced at her, his brow furrowing. "You all right, Sarah?" Sarah nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief at Chris's presence. He'd always been a grounding influence, a steady presence who seemed to know just when she needed support. And right now, she felt as though she were walking on a tightrope, precariously close to falling. "Yeah, I'm fine," she murmured, grateful for Chris's quiet understanding. She hesitated, torn between the loyalty she felt for Luke and the growing trust she had in Chris. Sensing the tension, Chris took her hand gently, his expression filled with unspoken questions. "Sarah, I think there's something you should know," he said quietly. He cast a quick glance at Luke, his jaw tight. "I didn't just show up by coincidence. I came because I've been following Luke for a while." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Chris took a deep breath. "I'm a private investigator. I was hired to look into a series of financial fraud cases, and Luke's name came up. I didn't know who he was to you, Sarah, until I saw him today on the flight. I didn't want to tell you like this, but I couldn't let you stay in the dark." Her mind reeled, the walls of reality closing in around her. She felt as if she were caught in a cruel trap, each revelation pulling her deeper into a labyrinth of deception and betrayal. She stared at Luke, who looked back at her, his face ashen. "Is it true?" she asked him, her voice barely a whisper. "Were you involved in something illegal? Did you abandon us because of a crime?" Luke's face hardened, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He didn't deny it. Instead, he looked away, shame darkening his eyes. "Yes, I thought I could fix it before you ever knew, but I failed." Sarah felt as though the ground beneath her had dissolved, leaving her adrift, betrayed by the man she'd once loved. She turned away, struggling to hold back the tears threatening to spill over. Chris placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to face this alone, Sarah. I'll help you, whatever you decide." The next day, Sarah awoke to a quiet house, the weight of yesterday's revelations pressing down on her. She went through her morning routine mechanically, helping Noah with breakfast before dropping him off at school. When she returned home, Luke was waiting for her in the living room, his expression haunted. He began to speak, his words spilling out in a desperate attempt at redemption. He admitted that he'd gotten involved with a group of people who had promised easy money, leading him down a path he couldn't escape. He detailed the extent of his crimes, explaining that his disappearance was meant to protect her and Noah from any repercussions. "You have every reason to hate me," he said, his voice breaking. "I was a coward, Sarah. I thought that if I disappeared, I could somehow make it right. But I see now that I only made things worse." Sarah's voice was cold as she spoke. "You let me think you were dead. You let me grieve for you, to tell Noah his father was gone. You took everything from us." Luke looked down, unable to meet her gaze. "I know, and I'll live with that guilt for the rest of my life." She took a shaky breath, her emotions a tangled mess. "Why come back now? Why put us in danger again?" "Because I'm running out of options," he admitted. "They found me, Sarah. I don't know how long I have left, but I wanted to at least try to make things right." Sarah scoffed. "You can't make things right with an apology, Luke. You shattered our lives, and nothing you say can fix that." Luke's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, she saw a genuine remorse etched into his features. He tried to reach for her, but she stepped back, her resolve hardening. "I can't help you, Luke," she said softly. "You made your choice when you left us. Now I have to make mine." Luke hung his head, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I understand, but I'll always love you, Sarah. No matter what, that's something I'll never stop feeling." Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat, fighting the tidal wave of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "Goodbye, Luke," she whispered, her voice thick with sorrow. She turned away, walking out of the room, feeling the weight of finality settle over her. That night, Sarah met with Chris, her heart heavy with the knowledge that her life would never be the same. She sat across from him at the small cafe where they'd met many times before, feeling the solid ground of his presence beneath her feet. "You did the right thing, Sarah," Chris said gently. "Sometimes letting go is the only way to move forward." Sarah nodded, her gaze distant. I wish things had been different. I wish he'd been the man I thought he was." Chris reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "You're not alone, Sarah. I'm here, and I'll help you rebuild, however long it takes." For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark of warmth in the darkness. She knew it would be a long road, but with Chris by her side, she felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. The following days were a haze of exhaustion and numbness for Sarah. She went through her routine on autopilot, attending to Noah and managing her work responsibilities. But inside, she was a whirl of unresolved emotions. Chris remained a steady presence, checking in on her without pressing her for details, a quiet comfort in the middle of her storm. One afternoon, as she finished a shift, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Chris. "I know this has been a hard week. If you're up for it, I'd like to take you out tonight. Dinner's on me." For a moment, Sarah hesitated. Part of her wanted to decline and retreat into the safety of her routine. But another part, the part that was weary of the endless, painful questions, yearned for even a brief escape from the reality of her situation. After a pause, she replied, "Dinner sounds nice. Thank you." That evening, Chris arrived at her door promptly, his demeanor as warm and calm as ever. He wore a simple button-up shirt and jeans, his usual easygoing manner softening the tension she'd been carrying all day. "You look wonderful," he said, his gaze steady but respectful, putting her instantly at ease. Sarah managed a shy smile, adjusting the hem of her dress. "Thank you. I think I needed a reason to feel normal for once." They drove to a cozy, understated restaurant tucked away from the bustling streets. The ambience was warm, with candlelit tables and soft music playing in the background. As they settled in, Sarah felt herself relax for the first time in weeks. Their conversation began light, filled with stories from Chris's early days as a private investigator and his love for travel. He made her laugh with tales of late-night stakeouts gone wrong and the strange people he'd encountered along the way. As dinner progressed, Chris grew more serious. "Sarah, I know you've been through more than anyone should have to bear. I want you to know that whatever you're feeling, anger, hurt, confusion, it's all valid." Sarah looked down, her fingers tracing the edge of her glass. "I keep wondering if I made a mistake. I loved him so deeply, Chris, and I trusted him with everything. And now, I can't help but feel that it was all for nothing." Chris reached across the table, his hand resting over hers. "That love wasn't wasted, Sarah. It shaped you, and it brought Noah into this world. But it doesn't define you. You're stronger than you know." His words brought a warmth to her heart that she hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time since Luke's reappearance, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could let go of the past and look toward the future. They left the restaurant and walked through the quiet streets, the evening air cool against her skin. As they strolled, Chris asked her about her life with Noah, about her dreams and hopes, gently drawing her out of the shadow that had clung to her since Luke's return. When he dropped her off at home, Chris paused, his gaze soft. "I meant what I said, Sarah. You don't have to go through this alone. Whatever you need, I'm here." The vulnerability in his words struck her, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest. She gave him a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Chris. Really." As she closed the door behind her, Sarah felt a quiet sense of comfort settle over her. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel entirely alone. A week passed, filled with small, hopeful steps forward. Sarah found herself leaning on Chris more, their friendship blossoming into something deeper, though neither dared to label it. He'd become her confidant, a safe place to process the emotions that had long been tangled inside her. One evening, as she was tucking Noah into bed, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her heart sank as she read the words. "I need to see you, Sarah. Just one last time. Please." It was Luke. Anxious, Sarah debated whether to ignore it. but she knew deep down that she couldn't fully move on without facing him one final time. She replied with a simple "where?" and felt a mixture of dread and determination as she read his response. "The park near our old house. Tomorrow night." The next day, she told Chris about the message, seeking his advice. "Are you sure you want to go?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "You don't owe him anything, Sarah. He put you through enough." "I know," she replied quietly. "But I need closure. I need to know if he truly regrets what he did. Otherwise, I'll always wonder." Chris nodded, his expression filled with understanding. "Then let me come with you. You don't have to do this alone." The next evening, Sarah met Luke at the park, with Chris keeping a discreet distance. The park was nearly empty, the fading light casting long shadows across the benches and pathways. Luke was already there, waiting at the edge of a secluded grove. He looked rougher than before, his clothes disheveled, his eyes hollow. She approached cautiously, her pulse pounding as he turned to face her. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know I don't deserve it." Sarah crossed her arms, her expression steely. "What do you want, Luke?" He ran a hand through his hair, a look of desperation flashing across his face. "I wanted to see you, to tell you, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean much, but I mean it, Sarah. Every single day, I regret leaving you and Noah." She held his gaze, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. "Then why did you do it? Why did you leave us to pick up the pieces while you ran off to protect yourself?" Luke looked down, his hands clenched. "Because I was a coward. I convinced myself that it was the only way, that I was saving you both. But in reality, I was just trying to escape. I was too weak to face the consequences." His words struck her, but the anger bubbling inside her didn't fade. "You let us believe you were dead, Luke. Do you have any idea what that did to me? What it did to Noah?" A flash of pain crossed his face, and he nodded, his shoulders slumping. "I know, and I'll never forgive myself for it. But I came here because I need your help, Sarah. Just one last time. After that, I swear you'll never have to see me again." Sarah's stomach twisted as he handed her an envelope. She opened it, her heart sinking as she saw a large sum of cash and a note. "It's all I have left," he explained. "I know it doesn't make up for anything, but I want you and Noah to have it. Take it and please just give me a little time. I'll disappear for good." She looked at the money, her mind reeling. The money would certainly help, but at what cost? Could she really trust Luke to stay away this time? Did he truly want to make amends? Or was this just another lie? As she struggled with her decision, Chris stepped forward, his presence reassuring. "Sarah, you don't have to make this choice now," he said gently. "Remember, you're not alone." She turned to him, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm tired of this, Chris. I'm tired of living in the shadow of his mistakes." Chris placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Then let go, Sarah. You've done all you can. It's time to put yourself and Noah first." She looked back at Luke, her mind clearing with newfound resolve. "I can't help you, Luke. Not anymore. I need to move on. And so does Noah." Luke's face fell, and for a moment, he looked broken. "I understand," he whispered. "Goodbye, Sarah." He turned and walked away, his silhouette blending into the shadows as he disappeared into the night. Sarah watched him go, feeling a bittersweet mix of sorrow and relief. As she and Chris left the park, Sarah felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her heart. The decision had been painful, but she knew it was the right one. Luke's chapter in her life was finally over. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself growing closer to Chris. They spent more time together, and with each conversation, her trust in him deepened. He was patient, kind, and respectful, never pushing her, but always there when she needed him. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching Noah play in the yard, Chris took her hand. "Sarah, I know it's been a difficult journey, but I want you to know that I'm here for the long haul. Whatever you need, whatever pace you're comfortable with, I'm here." She looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and something more, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. "Thank you, Chris," she murmured, "for everything." Slowly, they leaned in, sharing a gentle, tender kiss that promised a new beginning. For the first time in years, Sarah felt the possibility of happiness blossom in her heart. As they parted, Chris rested his forehead against hers. "This is just the beginning, Sarah. You've been through so much, but you've come out stronger. And I'm honored to be part of your future." Sarah smiled, her eyes misty with gratitude and hope. "I'm ready for it, Chris. I'm finally ready." Months later, Sarah, Chris, and Noah gathered for a family picnic. The sun was warm on their faces as they laughed, ate, and played games together. Sarah watched her son with joy, marveling at how far they'd come. She felt whole, stronger, and at peace. With Chris by her side, she knew she could face any challenge life threw her way. She had finally closed the door on the past and was embracing a future filled with love, hope, and the family she'd never imagined. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the park, Sarah felt a quiet contentment settle over her heart. She knew she had found her place in the world, and it was right here, surrounded by love. Thank you for joining us on this journey with Sarah, a story of love, loss, and second chances. If you enjoyed this story and want more heartwarming tales that explore resilience and the strength of the human spirit, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. We've got plenty more stories coming up, so stay tuned and let's continue exploring these incredible journeys together. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.